You're gonna hear a lot of people say that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that you should always forgive because life is short and grudges are heavy. I used to believe every word of that. I built my entire life around it. And then, one Tuesday morning, while I was standing in the hospital break room eating a granola bar between shifts, my phone buzzed with a bank alert that changed everything. The notification said my savings account had been reduced by $8,400. I remember staring at the screen for so long that the display went dark. I unlocked it again. Read it again. Same number. Same sick feeling spreading from my stomach upward into my throat. I had $11,200 in that account, money I had saved over 3 years of working double shifts, skipping vacations, bringing lunch to work every single day instead of eating out. That was my down payment. That was my way out. And in the time it took me to eat a granola bar, more than 3/4 of it was gone. I called the bank immediately. The representative told me the transfer had been initiated from a linked account, my mother's account. The joint account we had opened together when I was 17 so she could deposit my birthday money and my first paychecks while I was still a minor. I had forgotten to remove the linkage when I turned 18. I had forgotten because I trusted her. I had forgotten because it never crossed my mind that she would ever use it. I need to back up so you understand how I got there. My name is Maya. I am 28 years old. I have been a licensed practical nurse for 5 years. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, the oldest of 2 children. My brother, Derek, is 3 years younger than me and has always been, without exception, the favorite. I do not say that with bitterness anymore. I say it the way you state a fact about the weather. It rained on Tuesday. Derek was the favorite. Some things just are what they are. My mother is a woman who loves loudly and selectively. She worked as a school administrator for 20 years and she is smart, capable, and completely blind to the way she has treated me differently my entire life. My father passed away when I was 16. After that, it was just the 3 of us in the house I grew up in. My mother, my brother, and me. I paid for my own college. My mother took out a small loan to cover Derek's first year, then another for his second, and by his 3rd year he had dropped out entirely to, quote, find himself. He found himself working part-time at a sporting goods store and spending the rest of his time with a rotating cast of friends who had big plans and no follow-through. He was 25 years old and still living at home. My mother made his bed. She did his laundry. She told everyone who asked that he was figuring things out and that he had so much potential. I moved back home at 26, not because I needed to, but because I was being smart. Rent in my part of Cincinnati had spiked badly after a round of new development, and my apartment lease was up. I sat down with a spreadsheet and I calculated that if I moved home for 18 months and paid my mother a reasonable amount for room and board, I could save enough to put 20% down on a condo and never have to worry about a landlord again. My mother agreed to the arrangement. I paid her $700 a month. I bought my own groceries. I paid my own phone bill, my own car insurance, my own subscriptions. I contributed. I was not a freeloader. What I was, apparently, was a resource. The 18 months stretched to 22 because the market moved. I adjusted my timeline and kept saving. I had a number in my head, $12,000, and I was getting close. I worked nights twice a week for the differential pay. I picked up weekend shifts when they were available. I lived carefully and intentionally because I had a goal and I did not want anything to derail it. I should have been more careful about what I left unguarded. 3 months before the bank alert, Derek had a car accident. He ran a red light and hit another vehicle. Nobody was seriously hurt, thank God. But the damage was significant and Derek had let his insurance lapse 2 months earlier because, as he explained to my mother with complete sincerity, he had been meaning to deal with that. The other driver's repairs plus Derek's fines and the resulting civil demand totaled a little over $9,000. My mother told me about the accident at dinner. I expressed concern for everyone involved. I did not offer money. I had learned by then not to open that door even a crack because a crack always became a flood with my family. My mother said she was going to handle it. She said she had some money set aside. I believed her because I wanted to and because I was tired and because it was easier than asking follow-up questions. What she actually did was transfer $8,400 from my savings account to Derek's debt using the joint account access she had retained since I was a teenager. I know this because the bank told me. I know this because I have the transaction records. I know this because when I called my mother from the hospital parking lot after my shift ended that Tuesday, she did not deny it. She did not even sound particularly sorry. She said, "Maya, I was going to tell you. I just needed time to figure out how to explain it." I said, "You took $8,400 from my account." She said, "It was an emergency. Derek could have had his license suspended. He could have had his wages garnished." I said, "That money was my down payment." She said, "You can save it again. You're young. You have a good job." I stood in that parking lot for a long time after the call ended. The sun was going down and the air smelled like exhaust and cut grass from somewhere nearby, and I felt something shift inside me that I do not think has ever shifted back. It was not rage exactly, it was clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives so late you almost resent it for taking so long. I went inside and pulled up the bank app again. I screenshotted every transaction, every linked account record, every piece of documentation I could access. Then I drove to the police station. I know that some people reading this will wonder why I did not hesitate. I want to explain that too, because I think it matters. In my family, the unspoken rule had always been that you do not escalate. You do not make things bigger than they need to be. You absorb the thing that has been done to you and you adjust and you move on, because family is everything and blood is thicker and life is short. I had followed that rule my entire life. I had followed it when my mother spent $300 of my birthday money on Derek's school trip when I was 14. I had followed it when she co-signed his first car loan and then pressured me to help with 2 payments when he fell behind. I had followed it so many times that following it had started to feel like breathing, automatic, unconscious, something I did not even realize I was doing. The bank alert broke something in me, but it also built something. It built a very clear thought that said, "This is theft. What she did has a legal name, and that name is theft." And I was not going to breathe through this one. The officer I spoke to at the station was a woman named Officer Daniels. She was patient and thorough. She asked me whether I had authorized the transfer at any point, in writing or verbally. I said no. She asked whether my mother had ever had documented permission to access that specific account independently. I said she had retained access through a linked structure from when I was a minor, but I had never given her explicit authorization to transfer funds. Officer Daniels took my statement and my documentation and told me the department would be in touch. I did not tell my mother or Derek what I had done. I drove home, packed a bag with 3 days of clothing, texted my coworker and friend Priya to ask if I could stay with her for a few nights, and left the house before anyone woke up the next morning. I left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I know what you did. I have reported it. Do not contact me until I reach out to you." My mother called me 11 times that day. Derek sent me a text that said, "Maya, this is a family matter. You need to calm down and think about what you're doing to us." I read it twice and put my phone face down on Priya's coffee table and made myself a cup of tea. I want to pause here and say something about that. About the experience of being told that you are doing something to the person who has wronged you. Derek had just had his $9,000 debt erased with money that was not his. My savings were gutted. My timeline was destroyed. My goal of having something of my own, something nobody could take from me, had been set back by years. And the framing, from both of them, was that I was the one causing harm. I was the one being dramatic. I was the one being dramatic. I was the one tearing the family apart. I spent a long time thinking about why I'd never seen it clearly before. I think it was because I grew up inside the framing. When you are raised by someone who consistently redefines your pain as your fault, you eventually start to believe it. You start to look for the ways in which you must be the problem. You make yourself smaller and more accommodating because that is the only version of yourself that gets approval. And approval, when it is the only warmth available, starts to feel like love. It took me until I was standing in a police station with 8 years of bank records on my phone to understand that what I had been accepting was not love. It was management. They had learned how to manage me, and I had learned to call it family. I stayed with Priya for a week. During that time, I contacted a tenant rights attorney who confirmed what I suspected. Since the account had originally been opened jointly, but I had been an adult for over a decade, the transfer constituted unauthorized access to my funds regardless of the legacy linkage structure. She was not optimistic about criminal charges given the family relationship and the shared account history, but she was confident about civil recovery. I filed a civil suit against my mother for $8,400. I also went to my bank and closed every account, opened new ones at a different institution, and ensured that not a single piece of my financial life was accessible to anyone in my family ever again. The bank representative who helped me was a young man who said nothing about my situation, just processed everything efficiently and handed me my new card with a small nod that I chose to interpret as solidarity. I found a furnished room rental near the hospital. It was small, a bedroom with a shared kitchen and bathroom in a house with 2 other working adults. I paid $950 a month. It was more than I had been paying my mother and significantly less than an apartment. And the people I lived with were quiet and kept to themselves and did not take things that did not belong to them, which at that point felt like an extraordinary luxury. My mother hired a family attorney who sent me a letter explaining that the transfer had been made under the assumption of a long-standing family financial agreement and that she had intended to repay the funds. I sent the letter to my attorney, who responded with the documentation showing no such agreement had ever existed in writing, a detailed accounting of every payment I had made to my mother over the 22 months I had lived there, and a reiteration of my civil claim. My mother called my aunt. My aunt called me to say that my mother was devastated and that this was tearing the family apart and that I needed to ask myself whether $8,000 was worth destroying a relationship. I told my aunt that I had not destroyed any relationship. I had responded to the destruction of one. My aunt said she understood, but that sometimes being the bigger person meant letting things go. I said, I have been the bigger person for 28 years. I am done being bigger. I am going to be exactly the right size. She did not know what to say to that, and the call ended shortly after. The civil proceeding took 4 months. My mother ultimately settled rather than go to court, agreeing to repay the $8,400 in a structured arrangement over 14 months. My attorney's fees ate into that, but I came out with just over $6,000 recovered, plus the knowledge that what happened to me was documented, acknowledged, and legally addressed. I cannot tell you how much that last part mattered. It was not about the money, at least not entirely. It was about having the reality of what happened confirmed somewhere outside my own head. Derek, for his part, sent me a series of messages over those months ranging from angry to pleading to weirdly casual, as though he had simply forgotten that any of this had occurred. At one point he texted to ask if I wanted to come to a cookout at my mother's house because there would be ribs. I stared at that message for a long time trying to figure out if he was serious. He was. I did not go to the cookout. What I did do, during those 4 months and the months after, was rebuild with a focus I had not felt before. I picked up additional per diem shifts through a nursing agency that contracted with multiple hospitals. I sold some things I did not need. I canceled every subscription that was not essential. I was not punishing myself. I was being intentional in a way I had not been before, because before I had been building towards something I believed was safe. And now I understood that nothing is safe unless you protect it. By the time the settlement was finalized, I had managed to recover most of my savings. Not all of it. The attorney fees and the months of higher rent had taken their portion, but I was closer to my number than I expected. 6 months after moving out, I signed a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment. Not a condo yet, but my own space with my name on the door and no one else's name on anything. I furnished it slowly, the way you do when you are being careful. A bed first, then a couch from a warehouse sale. A kitchen table I found secondhand and sanded and repainted myself on a Saturday morning while listening to a podcast. Sunlight coming in through the window I had opened. A cup of coffee cooling on the counter. I remember thinking that this was the most peaceful I had ever felt in a home. My mother and I are not in contact. I have thought carefully about whether that is the right choice for me, and I keep arriving at the same answer. The thing about a relationship in which you have always been the one absorbing and adjusting and accommodating is that you have to decide whether you believe it can fundamentally change, and to believe that you have to believe the other person sees what has happened clearly enough to change it. My mother does not see it. She is a woman who took $8,000 from her daughter's savings account and then spent 4 months calling it a misunderstanding. She is a woman who, at the end of all of it, told my aunt that she could not understand why I was being so cold. The framing never changed. I was always the one doing something to her. Derek and I have also not spoken. I do not miss the relationship we had, because the relationship we had was not a real one. It was me being useful to him and him accepting that usefulness without acknowledgement or reciprocity. I miss the idea of a brother. I do not miss him. What I have instead are the people I have chosen deliberately. Priya, who let me sleep on her couch without asking for anything in return, and who has never once told me I am being too hard on my family. My coworker James, who is 61 years old and has worked in nursing for 30 years, and who told me once, over hospital cafeteria coffee at 3 in the morning, that the most important thing he ever did for himself was stop explaining his choices to people who had already decided he was wrong. My neighbor in the apartment building, a woman named Sandra, who is 70 and retired and has given me more practical wisdom over shared hallway conversations than I received in an entire childhood. I have my apartment. I have my job, which I am good at and which I find genuinely meaningful. I have an emergency fund that nobody but me can access. I have a Roth IRA that I opened 6 months ago and which currently holds exactly $3,200, and I check the balance sometimes not because I am anxious about it, but because I like seeing something I built, something that belongs entirely to me, sitting there quietly and growing. I am going to buy a condo. Maybe in 2 years, maybe less. When I do, my name will be the only one on the paperwork. I do not tell this story because I want sympathy, though I understand if that is what it sounds like. I tell it because I spent a long time believing that the way my family treated me was the way things had to be, and I want anyone who recognizes something in this to know that it does not. The voice that says you are being dramatic, the voice that says this is just how families work, the voice that says you should be grateful for what you have. Those voices can belong to the people who are taking from you, and you are allowed to stop listening to them. The bank alert changed my life, not because it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me, but because it was the first thing that happened to me that I could hold up in the light and name correctly. Everything before it, every minimized slight, every redirected birthday money, every time I'd been told to be the bigger person, had been deniable, frameable, arguable. This one had a dollar amount and a timestamp. This one I could take to a police station. This one gave me the language to go back and rename everything that came before it. That clarity is worth more than $8,000. It is worth more than any figure I could put on it. My lease renewed last month. I signed it myself, standing in the leasing office with a pen in my hand and nobody waiting for me in the parking lot. When I got back to my apartment, I made dinner and ate it at my kitchen table and watched the sun go down through my own window. If you are watching this or reading this, and you are in a house where your effort is invisible and your savings are someone else's safety net and every conversation about fairness ends with you being called selfish, I want you to know something. Not that it gets easier, because I cannot promise you that. Not that your family will eventually understand, because I cannot promise you that either. What I can tell you is that there is a life on the other side of that house. A quiet one, in some ways. A lonelier one, at first, but one that belongs to you from the floor to the ceiling, from the front door to the back wall, every inch of it undeniably yours. That is worth protecting. I protected mine,